All right. Good morning and good afternoon. This is a special edition of SpeakFyre. My name is Jody Sedrick. I'm the host of FathersFyre, and I'm just going to do a quick introduction for everybody while we're going live to our different pages and our personal sites, because we're having a very candid, open discussion about the murder of George Floyd earlier in the week and the ensuing ripple effects that has caused across our nation, and of course having an incredible dialogue among friends and peers. And so we as a SpeakFyre family thought we would get together since we are such a diverse background, and we thought that we would go live and have a conversation. So let's go around the table. We'll start out with Michael Gingras. He's the handsome guy up in the upper left, or my left. He hosts LeadershipFyre. The lovely queen to my right, that is Aisha Thomas. She hosts the podcast InternalFyre, and I was like we have so many fires, I have to get them all. Bobby Berg in the lower left, he's StudentFyre. Sean Brasfield, my boy, in the middle, right below me, he is with YoungFyre. And of course, Neil Legend, who always has incredible energy, is the host of ChampionFyre. So we are super, super excited. Like you guys, I'm sure every night, every day, it has been a conversation of topic. And I think what has been the biggest eye opener for America overwide is that we actually witnessed in very real time the murder of somebody else through the abuse of power by somebody that should be entrusted to protect and serve. And I think that has been one of the most raw thing, in addition to the sheer abuse of power for a black brother. And so I thought it would be good to start out with, what are the conversations that you're having at home? And let's start there, and then let's talk about, after that, some things that we in our own circles can do to create an impact. So I'd actually like to start with Aisha. She always has such wisdom and insight that I thought it would be good to let the lady go first. And let's talk about, what are the kind of conversations that you're having in your home?
Well, for me, of course, I have children. I'm a single mother of two. I have a son and a daughter. And I always tell people my experience is very different because there's so many different topics that affect me in different ways because I'm West African, right? So I have the immigrant connection. Then I have a father who practices Islam. He's a Muslim. So I have, that dynamic, which has been, a big issue in the past. And people have their biases and feelings about those who practice, Islam. I also am someone that didn't really understand slavery until I came to the United States. Because again, from the background I come from, I'm African. I come from my culture. I know exactly where I came from. And it wasn't until I was in the classroom and I started to hear this thing about slavery and this person called Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the civil rights. And I was like, what? Wait, what happened? So although it's like I have so many different experiences, and I have a son that I'm raising as well. And the interesting thing is, like, as I grew up, like a lot of African American males and females have to tell their children about what you should do when you interact with the police, about discrimination. But my parents would have never had to have that conversation with me back home because the police officers look like us. We don't deal with the kind of things and the American experience that Black Americans have. So for me, it's like I'm literally a part of the first generation in my family having to have these conversations that they never had because, again, we were so connected to our culture. We were connected to our people. So for me, and again, my son, he's 7 years old, and just the idea and the thought of when he goes out and just kind of what the experiences he has. And I haven't been really able to talk to them yet. We were watching a movie last night, Just Mercy, and, my children were just watching it, but it's like, I don't know when is the right time when to have that conversation because they're so young. But the reality is, for my community, for my children, there will be a time where I have to have that conversation, because my daughter has been bullied because she has dreadlocks. She had that experience just today when we went to church, so it's like there's so many different conversations I need to have, and I just don't know when is the right time to have it. But for me, I'm just working through the mindset of, Aisha, you will have to have this conversation with your kids at some point.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest challenges is how do you have the conversation with your kids? Because I mean, my daughter, who we adopted from Haiti, I mean, she has been very vocal about her feelings. She's like, "Mom, Dad, how do I reconcile how I'm feeling inside with what I saw, and how do I talk to my friends about it?" Because one of the things that she's been really frustrated about, being in Idaho. I mean, Idaho is white bread as they come. I mean, it is really white bread, right? And so a lot of her friends, they just don't have experience with half African American or Haitian people. And so, like, one of the things that really frustrates her is they always want to touch her hair or asking her about her hair. She was, "I get tired of having the same conversation over and over." And I'm like, well, I go, and I get that, but on the same token, you have to recognize it's brand new to them, just like they're brand new to you in some ways. And so one of the challenging parts is, how do we have the conversations that are very difficult so that we can help all of us grow together? And I know, Sean, you have young kids, and your kids been asking you some really tough questions. So since we're talking about kids and talking to them, let's go to you and your experience about talking to your boy with what's been going on.
And with me, I'm kind of in the same boat as Aisha, because, like, again, my kids are relatively young. My youngest turns 4 this month, and then my middle girl, she'll be 7 next month. My oldest, but he'll be 9 in August. So he's the more of my focus right now, because we had a conversation about it. I was trying to ease into it, kind of talk to him a little bit about what's going on without, like, being so potent with it. But when I asked him, does he understand anything's going on? And one of his first questions back to me was, "Well, Dad, didn't Dr. King take care of that already?" And I'm like, wow, no, son, I wish he would have, but he made some great headway, but it's showing that we still have a long way to go. But I was stuck. I literally got stuck in trying to answer his inquiries. Then he said, "Well, kids in my school, like, they don't hate me." And I'm like, wow. I'm like, well, that's good. But in my back of my mind, I'm saying, in due time, as you get older, that will sadly change, because the quote by James Baldwin came to my mind when he said, as long as your skin is black, that's the weapon that they see, you'll forever be armed. And in due time, with his experience in this nation, he'll have to face the ugliness of that as he gets older. And I start thinking, like, at what point in his age does he go from cute and just cool to looked at as dangerous?
So, Bobby, let's go to you next, buddy. I mean, you're up in Alaska. What have your experiences been with your wife, because you don't have children, but also with your community in discussing, this really raw experience that we have had as Americans?
So it's very unique up here in Alaska, especially in Anchorage. Personally, I have not felt any sort of racial bias or anything while being up here, which for me is the first time in my life that's ever happened. And I remember once the news broke of this, terrible incident, Jenny kind of looked at me and she goes, I can't believe this. Like, has anybody looked at you differently or treated you differently? Just asking from a place of honest, intrigue. And I was like, well, no. And I had to actually think about it for a second and, like, let that feeling settle in. I was like, I've never felt that from I grew up in North Royalton, Ohio, which, I mean, when I grew up there, there was one, maybe two black families in the whole city. And I always got looked at. I always was the butt of the joke. It was always directed at me. And I was like, that just seemed normal because that's just what we did. I didn't know any different. And now being up here, especially with this incident, that didn't happen. People are now looking at me and going, hey, so can I get your perspective on this? I know how I think about this, but I don't really think that's right because I've just lived in Alaska my whole life. Can I get a completely, neutral outside perspective? And I'm like, whoa, wait, what? It's such a culture shift because I've never experienced something like this. Truthfully, a lot of the racial bias goes more towards the Alaskan Natives than anyone else. And it's, I know this isn't a funny subject, but pardon the laughter. It's uncomfortable to say this. It doesn't really matter where you come from, what you look like. Racial bias looks the same. Be it from, one party to another, it looks the same because some of the Alaskan Natives that I've spoken to have said the same grievances that I've experienced in the lower 48. And I'm like, oh, it's okay. So that's just what racism looks like. Those are just the acts that happen. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating to see that we've made all this progress in life, yet we're still so far behind.
Yeah, so let's go to you, LeadershipFyre, Michael Gingras. I mean, you really focus on leadership. And so first of all, let's talk about, your experience with your wife and other people in your circle, but how do we lead to a change? I mean, we've been having the same conversation for 52 years. It's just now it's being documented, and so it's in people's face. I love it. Somebody said it's not that racism had gone away. It's just now we're filming it. We're seeing the abuse of power being filmed, and we're seeing people being treated mispoorly. So how do we change that narrative and lead people to a different direction?
Well, I mean, that's an excellent question, but when we can, as a nation, stand by and watch somebody murdered, leadership starts right there. Not with the murderer, right? He's whatever, I don't want to swear, but the people that stood there next to him and allowed that to happen. That's where leadership is needed. Having the courage to stand up and say, no, I will not allow this on my watch. That is where leadership is required. Leadership is required to call it what it is, to say, I see that, and that is wrong, and I won't stand for it. Too often in our lives, whether it's in the workplace, with our family, our friends, our coworkers, our neighbors, where somebody will make like a little joke and say, haha, it's just a joke. It's not a joke. It's not funny. We have been going through this for what we would call this is the last 200 years, right? Where we've had this institutional problem with our country, and without the ability to stand up and say, I see this, I don't know that there is another path forward. So leadership begins with the courage to stand up and say, it's in all of us to say, I can see it, it exists. And then to have these conversations, to get together with your diverse friends and say, hey, I don't know how to handle this emotionally. So in my house, we've had those conversations, just like we were talking before we got on here. We're having those conversations. I don't know how to handle this. As the teachers, leaders, speakers, mentors that we are, the channels that we put out, the content that we grow, we're about solving problems and fixing problems and creating change and solution. And this just is so big. We don't know how that we can affect change and how we can be that change agent that ripples throughout the world. Maybe I'm going along, a little Bobby Berg in me, but I just want to say, that if you want to be leadership in moments like these, if you want to help your family, your friends, stand on your integrity, your values, who you think you are, be that person to the outside world. Be the person that you want the world to be when it's uncomfortable. Be the person that you want the world to see when it's hard. Be the person that you want the world to see when it's inconvenient, and say, I see it, it exists, this is real, and enough is enough.
Amen to that. I mean, I love that, because I know, like, when my daughter came to me and she's like, Dad, what do I do? I said, look, we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And as we become that change, we can then be the beacon for others to lead them to a better path. And it takes you. And one of the things that was most frustrating about watching the murder of George Floyd is you had three other guys. Any one of them could have changed it, and people were going, he can't breathe. And they just were so caught up in their power that they were, just dismissing it. And Judy and I have had a lot of the discussion. What would you have done? Would you have tackled the police guy and pushed him off? What kind of, and it takes courage to stand up and go, you know what, that is not right. And I think that one of the, as I reflect, especially on Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, is what the country needed in the 60s, in some ways, is still what we need today. We need somebody that can be the voice of peace and unification, but you also need somebody that's going to go, like my Sean Hart's cousin Kwame, burn it all down and start over, right? Because, and I know a lot of people get frustrated with the looting and all that stuff because in a lot of people's view, it distracts from the message. But it's like, how long can you kneel in protest and silence and not be heard? And so you need to have, I'm coming to the realization that you got to have both voices. And, this is Sunday, so I'm going to go out there. And so, the Savior chased the guys out of the temple with a whip saying, you've defiled my house. And that was the ultimate man of peace. And so if we can't start having a dialogue, to motivate change and be the leader in our own world, like Michael's pointing out, then we're going to be having these same conversations in 10 and 20 years. And I don't want my grandkids to be having these same conversations. So Neil, let's go to you, brother. How's your week been, and the conversation's been going on in your circles?
I mean, it's been mostly the same. And honestly, like it started off really, really hard just because I am an African American male. And I mean, anger started just building up inside me, hate started building up inside me. What should I do? And just luckily, I have brothers, I have mentors, I also pray, that's able to like simmer me down, just bring me back to reality and say, like, Neil, you don't move like this. So what can I do? And what I can do is like what Mike had said, is that like we are all leaders, like we all have came together to make a change in the world. And what you were just saying, as far as like burn, you said Sean Hart cousin said, like, let's burn it down. So I devised a plan. And the thing is, you cannot build a house on sand. You can't build a house on sand. So before you actually start to build a house, you have to replace that sand with cement. And that goes all the way back to the Constitution. And I honestly believe that we have to rewrite the Constitution at this moment, because we're trying to actually rebuild right now on a Constitution that was actually written in 1787 and enforced in 1789. At that point in time, we were still slaves at that moment. The Constitution was written by white people for white people, not for African Americans. So when you're thinking of the Constitution, it was not written for. It doesn't really get to start address us until the 13th Amendment. So if you want to actually change, we have to change the Constitution. We have to rebuild the foundation before we want to move forward. Because at the end of the day, this stuff is still going to keep happening if we don't have something set in place for a foundation. At the end of the day, I'm still a black man in America. I'm still an African American. My sisters, my brother, we're still going through this. And just to jump back now to 2020, what I'm tired of is like, we do have cameras and videos, but what you said, what should we do? Should we rush? Should we tackle the officer? I really do believe it's going to have to get to that point to where we're seeing an injustice like that. We're actually going to have to step in. The tough thing about it is that it's going to be some more bloodshed with that, you know, because if we start to step in, the officer is going to turn their gun on the person that's trying to help. But we have to do that because at the end of the day, we're seeing a routine. A killing happened. It brings us together. We talk about it on our platforms. We hear about it on TV. And by the time we resolve that one, another killing has happened. So it's like, it ain't really no progress because we're still dealing. I mean, for me, I was talking to Sean. For me, I started paying close attention to this with Trayvon Martin. That was just really a few years ago compared to where this stuff actually started. And we're still dealing with the effects of that, and it's 2020. So what do we really do? I know I'm long-winded. Shout out Bobby Berg. But I'm gonna let y'all have it. There's more to say. I know we got more time, but I just leave you with that. We're really gonna have to unify. And I mean all races. This is not just a black thing. This is all races. We're gonna have to unify, and we're gonna have to make a difference. And I believe right now, 2020, that's what we're starting to do.
So, and Jody, if you don't mind, I just want to hop in. I'm sorry. But
no, I was actually going to go to you. So.
No, because it's I think it even goes deeper than that, right? Because yes, we can go in and we can change the laws, we can make changes, but I think that we need to start with the individuals first. Because the reality is, as you're saying it, I'm thinking in my head, like, bro, they ain't gonna change the Constitution. Because you have to have, it's the people behind making that change that need to feel and want to make that change. So as I've been I developed like this little leadership development process and thinking about unconscious bias, we have to start and check ourselves. We have to, those individuals that are stopping these processes from happening, are you even self-aware? Are you even aware? Like even when you were talking, Bobby, you're like, listen, it was only a couple Black families. I was the butt of the jokes. Hey, I thought that was the norm. But there's a level of self-awareness that we have to build. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, in regards to stereotypes, where are you learning? There's some things we need to unlearn. Like I talked about, like for instance, our first teachers are our parents. We're around certain circles of friends, and then media has a big part to play, not picking on media, but they do have a big part to play on what we're watching. I've watched shows that's created a bias between me and Black men. I've watched shows that's maybe looked at white women a certain way. I've watched shows that maybe look at girls that live in a certain area a certain kind of way. So you need to first check your stereotypes, where you're learning that from, because what's happening is that stereotypes are turning into unconscious bias. So consciously, yes, you're aware, but unconsciously, what you're feeding yourself, what conversations you're having is building a certain type of stereotype in your mind, where now when you interact with that person, you see that person, now your behavior is going to act one way versus the other. It's us against them. And now that's what evolves into a discriminatory act. So it always starts with self-awareness. And the reality is, are people willing to become more self-aware and say, you know what, I have been only watching this type of news. I have only been watching this aspect of the protest. I have only been having conversations with people in this circle, because some of us aren't in diverse spaces. And I think one of the greatest spaces that we're in, that there is diversity, is in the workspace. As a military member, I've ran into people that says, this is the first time I was around Black people. In the military, is the first time I was around Hispanic people. There were so many experiences that I've had that I'm blessed to have had because of the United States Air Force and the opportunities and the moving around. But I think it all ultimately starts with, yes, sometimes you're pushed into it because of the workspace you're in, but ultimately, do you want to become self-aware? Are you going to undo and unlearn some of those negative things you've embedded in your mindset that's turned into unconscious bias, that's turned into your behaviors being effective, and now it's turned into discriminatory actions? Or, there's some people who don't want to be self-aware. What they were grown up learning about is what they're going to believe. So will there stop being people that are racist or bigots out there? No. because they believe what they believe. So it sounds good, and I'm gonna just be real, it sounds amazing. I want it to be like that, but the reality is, do people want to become self-aware? Do they want to unlearn? Do they want to educate themselves so now they can say, yes, in 2020, because the world is so diverse, let's make the changes now? And unfortunately, everybody doesn't want that. Right,
Bobby, I see you doing a lot of naughty, man. Let's go over to you, man. What are your thoughts?
Let me just say something for like 30 seconds.
Go ahead.
It ain't even going to be 30 seconds. I agree 1,000% with what she said. I don't believe it's like one or the other. I believe it's both. I really do believe with what she said. I believe it's about how, which is on my other part of the plan that I haven't gotten to yet, but it's about higher learning and education. And you can, what she was saying, we can change the Constitution, we can make all the laws. If we do not change ourselves, it's not going to matter. And that's going to, like, I'm going to get into that. But at the end of the day, I think it's both. I think you have to have a change in Constitution, but you also have to have a change in yourself, so we won't continue to look divided and have unity amongst one another.
All right, Bobby, and then we're going to jump over to Sean.
No, I completely agree with what everyone's saying. It's in moments like this where terrible things are happening, I always look inward and I go, okay, what if, not that I was directly involved in this, but is there any way that I can facilitate a change, difference in discussion? Like, what can I do from where I'm at right now with the tools that I have? And it's crazy hearing we all live in completely different portions of the world, and we're all saying the same thing or something very similar anyway. And it surprises me because, the students that I'm working with, that I'm coaching one-on-one through the summer into, making their next school year a success, we've been having this discussion a lot, and not just during our scheduled coaching time, but almost daily. And they're going, Bobby, I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I don't feel like I really know what I'm doing or how to fix this. And I keep bringing up the question with them. And I'm like, okay, but what have you done to facilitate a change within yourself with how you're approaching the situation? And I think the problem that happens when mass issues like this occur and we film it and we all see it and it becomes the norm is we all have this conversation, and that's where it stops for so many people. So many people think that, oh, well, I had the conversation. Cool. That's a great start, and good on you for putting yourself in that vulnerable spot. But now what? What's next? That's the one thing I want anyone that's tuning in to really think about. Like, what are you going to do after you've started the conversation? Because that's when the real change happens.
Mm. My brother Sean?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Bobby. It's like so many people are all in their social pockets and they're comfortable. And many people are afraid to have those difficult, uncomfortable conversations. Because when you start to have those uncomfortable conversations, it begins to, if you have ever sat with someone and start having an uncomfortable conversation, they can kind of start moving around and squirming. And you can tell like it's hitting them and they don't know what to do. And then they start having these like nonverbal, I just call them little glitches where they're looking around and they're no longer focusing on like you while you're talking, because the things you're talking about is hitting them. And it's like, continue to have that. And it's like, feel that. I want you to feel that, like stay right there. Don't try to get yourself comfortable. Come out of that comfort zone and let all this stuff hit you. And I'm like, if people, because I've seen so many people having they were silent during the issue that caused the rioting and the looting, but they didn't say anything. They didn't say much on that. But then they had something to say or post concerning the rioting and the protesting. But it's like, and it goes back to something that that actor and civil rights activist Jesse Williams said a few years back at the BET Awards. He said, if you don't have any interest in the plight and the freedoms of Black people in this nation, then don't make suggestions for those who do. like sit down. Like don't get to that place where you're offering suggestions if you're okay with where everything is right now. And I think it's when you go back to your pockets of your social comforts, have those difficult conversations. Just like when we come to circles and tables like this, we have those difficult conversations. Like take those things you talk about here, take them to your social pockets and have those difficult conversations. But like we were saying, don't let it stop there. Like have the difficult conversations and challenge those people around you and challenge yourself. If you don't challenge yourself and you don't challenge those people around you, it's just going to be a discussion you had that one day during that season or whatever that was going on with our nation. And then you walked away and that was it.
You know, earlier in the week, I had the great opportunity to be on a panel similar to this with Sean Hart. And a question was asked by Nate Furlong that is really, really kind of stuck in my head. And he said, look, he goes, ever since Trayvon Martin, I've been trying to understand and ask the right questions as a white man so that I can understand what my African-American brothers and sisters are going through. He goes, but the challenge is when I've asked the questions, it has either seemed insensitive or I'm viewed as a racist because I'm asking it and I'm not intending to ask it in the wrong way, but it comes across bad. And so he goes, I've almost gotten to the point where until now where I've kind of given up because I can't get the experience. I can't get the answers that I've been seeking. So how do you bridge that gap when you're trying to have the dialogue, but you're coming across wrong, but the intent of your heart is going, I'm really trying to understand so that I can be the difference. So that's kind of I'm going to let anybody answer that because.
I say honestly, you probably have to ask the right person. You know, it's really the right person who have the right understanding, because honestly, if you just asking your neighbor, your coworker, that's just mostly the average person of the day. And if they're going to respond saying that you're racist or insensitive or something like that, then I believe they don't have the right answer anyway, because they should use that time for a teaching moment. They should use that time to open the conversation to understand, because at the end of the day, we all have questions, just like how a white person have a question, African-American, black men, we have questions too, and we want to ask them questions. So it has to be open dialogue across the board. And I would just say this, and I'll throw it to somebody else, is when you have the conversation, when you ask the questions, have the conversation and have the conversation with your ears open, looking to understand the other person and not to respond in defense of what they just said. You have to have the conversation. You both have to be understanding to the other person's point of view to even just move forward to the next step.
Michael?
I just want to kind of chime in on what Neil is saying, that there are lots of sensitive subjects in our lives, whether it's race, sexuality, and there are times that maybe we have an honest question, right? Like, hey, I'm really curious about this thing that I don't know, and the media doesn't quite give me that answer, right? Because that's where most of us will learn things that we don't have connection to, and we just have to find a way to find somebody in our lives who wants to have that conversation with us. So I'm a white man, that's obvious, but I'm sitting here with my great friends, and I could call any one of them and ask a question, right? So there are lots of things that are out there, whether it's in your head and you're like, hey, I just wonder. You don't just ask your coworker, because it's kind of wrong. You don't just ask your neighbor. That's kind of wrong. You got to go to somebody who you have a relationship with and say, Aisha, like, don't get me wrong, you know I love you, but could you help me? And she's going to help me because she knows I'm coming from a genuine place. If I just walk up to a coworker and say, hey, tell me about this, well, that almost feels attacking. It almost feels like I'm about to mock you with whatever you're going to say. So you need to go to someone who understands your heart before you exit your thought from your mouth.
I think
and I think what you're, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Aisha. Go ahead, please.
No, I was saying what you guys are saying is so true, is about building relationships. And do you have those relationships? I actually had a coworker that I work with at my organization, and I sent out an email because I know that my organization is mainly, Caucasian because of, of the just the space I'm in. So I'm a master resiliency trainer. So I talk about readiness and I talk about having self-care and just having that overall resiliency. So I sent a message about empathy, what it is, how to build it. And she responded and she told me that she did that, just that. She went into a space, was like, hey guys, how can she was open and ready to learn, and they kind of just shunned her. And I felt so bad for her, because she's been very open. Me and her have been on trips together. We've been in this organization for some time. And I was like, I'm sorry you dealt with that. I know from the interactions we had, it's been fine. But me and her had a relationship. We had some type of connection. And that's why it's so important that you are building relationships, because if you are talking to a random coworker you haven't even built rapport with, you might get the response. And the reality is you might get a response from people who you do know that are upset, and maybe it's not the right time. But I don't want you to give up there. So don't give up if somebody says no. Ask someone else. I actually responded to her and I gave her 5 Netflix. I sent her a couple movies to watch, like When They See Us. Watch a couple movies. Watch, some of right now. What's it? Mercy, Just Mercy is available free on Amazon. Watch that. Also watch the 13th. Watch these and then let's have a conversation. Because she's like, I want to talk. I was like, great. Go watch this first. Get these perspectives. Then let's have a conversation. So yes, you might be hit with someone that's not interested, but there's so many. I mean, Amazon has a whole part where it's nothing but documentaries, things you can do to educate yourself. But I love what you guys are saying about building those relationships, because a lot of us we're in these bubbles, and sometimes our communities or our bubbles are just people that look like us. But sometimes it is good to kind of step outside the box, read a book from someone who doesn't look like you, connect with a coworker that might be different than what you're used to, and really build those relationships. So when it is time to have those conversations, you're not just saying, hey, Bob, let's have this conversation, but you ain't Bob, y'all ain't like that.
Yeah.
So make sure you're building relationships, because I think by building relationships would also allow you to develop the empathy to utilize those active listening skills to really listen to what the person says. But do not try to have conversations with people you haven't even took time to connect with in the beginning. Start there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the power of that is so important, is trying to really, really connect. And I've shared this with Sean, and I share Sean Brasfield, and also with Sean Hart. I never, until my Haitian son got his driver's license, I never feared for any of my kids being pulled over by a police officer. Never, ever. I never had experienced that kind of worry and concern and fear. But the moment my son was late one night, I'm like, oh, crud, did he get pulled over? And I'm like, the wrong day where he's frustrated, he's, discouraged, he's feeling like he's not loved, and he's in a dark place, and he gets pulled over by the wrong cop with the wrong attitude, and we're having a horrible story. I had never, ever, ever felt like that. And I think that, it was very eye-opening to me to go, you know what, now I have a very small taste of what my brothers, Sean and Neil and Sean Hart and other men are experiencing every time they get pulled over. They shouldn't have that kind of fear. Nobody should have that kind of fear of people that are supposed to protect and serve and love them and protect their communities. And so I love that you said, watch some of these shows and then go to a trusted friend that you have a relationship and be able to have an open dialogue. Because when you start to connect and understand with a true heart for change, then we in our circle can be the change that we want to see in the world and lead that change outward and that have it ripple across multiple, people and communities. So
I think that's what we were.
Go ahead, Sean. Go ahead.
No, I was just alluding to, that's what kind of we were talking about a few days ago when you and I were talking, which kind of alludes back to what Aisha was saying when I was like, when we were agreed to like, let's do some research. Like when people say, hey, I want to know, I want to understand. And it's like, okay, well, before you just come at me and in your inquiry, try to do some research and reading yourself first. Like watch some of the documentaries, read a couple books, and then after that, because like you were saying, you could do the book work or like the research on different things, but then the experience part is the part that some people lack. Okay, I can see all that, I can do the book work, I can read, but then after that, then let me come to people who are outside of my circle, my normal circle, and let me ask them then, because then I'll be coming to the table with some kind of prior information as to the history of what people have been experiencing. Then I can kind of further, understand and ask the right questions and get the right information. Because one of the things that had bothered me was like when some people come at me and I'm like asking their questions, they want to know. I'm like, I get it, but it's like, what have you done first to kind of educate yourself? Because whenever there's anything out there, if you want to learn a new language, if you want to learn how to be a better cook, there are books and resources and all that stuff like that out there. You can read those things first, then kind of get into the kitchen and hands-on, get the experience. And then so I'm like, first kind of do that part and then come and have that conversation with me, because then you'll be able to kind of have an idea of what's going on and what we experienced. Then you can say, okay, hey, I understand I did this, but like, here's some more questions. Because I got to a point where I got flustered and tired of like teaching my people who I know, who I'm familiar with, who are, Caucasian, and they're like wanting to know. And it's like, after a while, it's like you just kind of get burned out. And I guess I can't really frame it and articulate it the way I want to, but it's like after a while, you're like, look, can you at least try to do some footwork on it first before you ask me, and then we kind of rock? Because I can come to the table discussion more open that way than just just popping off with a question and stuff like that, and you hadn't done any kind of prior work, I guess. So
yeah, don't make the. Go ahead, Cornelius. Go ahead.
No, it's just a question. I was going to ask. So when you actually encounter that person who has the questions but do not want to put in the work to study, how do you respond to that? And that's anybody can answer that.
I would give them the tools. Like I said, I gave them the tools and gave them some, I've just really been into documentaries. So I was like, hey, watch the Innocence Files, watch Just Mercy, watch 13th, When They See Us, which is a true story, because I always wanted to attach it to true stories. Watch these items, utilize these resources. Also with social media, with YouTube, you can there are people that can sit and watch this conversation here and get some background and get some ideas of what to tap into. But do that first, because you don't want your African-American person in your workspace to be now the I call like the black mascot. Now anything related, no, seriously, anything related to diversity, let's give it to Sean. Hey, Sean, let's ask Sean the question. Hey, Sean, what's going on, Sean? And I love that, because I learned that from one of the leaders in my organization. She told someone in our leadership, hey, don't turn me into the mascot. I don't want to be the person having to ask these diversity questions. You ask the question as the Caucasian gentleman. You be the person to take lead, because they're going to expect it from me. They're going to expect me to ask, hey, what do you think about diversity? What do you think about, inclusion? So you be the person. Don't have that person turn into the mascot. Do the research yourself, and then yourself can be like, okay, I understand now. I might have an idea of what I can do, what to take action with.
Yeah. I agree with that. So more so, I do have some Caucasian friends, and a lot of them asking questions. And then, they go away a day and then they come back another day, ask questions, but yet and still they haven't put in the work since the first time we talked. So like, how do I continue to respond when I'm knowing that you're not even taking serious what I have given you the first time? That's really my question. How do I continue to respond after I'm seeing they're not putting in the work to even learn?
There's something that's really hitting me, and it's kind of a combination of two insights that I've received recently. One was Sean actually shared, it's like my skin shouldn't be a weapon, right? But yet every day I can't change my skin color. And I wonder if there is, in some ways, and I'm really kind of thinking through this as I've been having different conversations, I think racism is on African American hearts and minds all the time. So it's almost a cultural thing of going, why do I have to fight against my skin? Why do I have to fight who I am? Whereas we as white Americans, we don't even think about it. And so when we're going, look, help me understand, help me create a bridge, what can I do? It's coming from a place of where it's not always on our mind, but now it's in our face, and we're going, whoa, there's a real problem here. My brothers, who I love, they're facing something that I'm not facing every single day. So how can it's almost a cultural difference that we need to figure out how we become one culture instead of multiple, but yet still embrace the diversity and uniqueness and the beauty of each one of us. And so I think that's part of the challenge that we're facing, as I think, and I'm kind of thinking at it dynamically here. It's like, how do we bridge that gap so that, because every one of it's like Sean said, he goes, I hate it when people say I don't see color. Right? Because they're dismissing my experience as a black man. But when a white guy says that, what they're really trying to say is, I don't judge on color. I see you, but they don't have the reference of going, I don't understand everything you've gone through. And so I'm trying to connect, but I'm failing because I haven't had similar experiences, and I'm trying to do. So how do we bridge that gap?
I want everyone to take a look at what Jody just did. So you started off saying, I don't see color. Cool. We've all heard that. We've all seen the phrase. We've all seen the comments where everyone goes crazy bashing it because of, it's dismissive. But in a span of 30 seconds, you were able to work out what you were trying to say. You were able to put to words the exact phrase that you wanted to actually convey. And too often do people do that, where they'll say something and all of a sudden someone jumps down their throat and they're like, hey, you can't say that, that's wrong, blah, because we're already ready for a fight. Whenever we have these uncomfortable conversations, people don't want, on average, they don't really want to understand. They want to beat the other person's point into submission. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating because we don't give that other person the time to get their full thought out. And this is something my wife and I do all the time. If we're having a disagreement on something, I don't oftentimes say what I'm thinking. Like, I'll say what I think gets my point across. And then a couple seconds later, she's like, I have no idea what you're trying to say. Even if I wanted to understand it, I have no idea what you're trying to say. So we have this thing now where when I say something, she'll just let me talk for however long it takes to get the full thought out. And finally, when I think I've said what I need to say, I'm like, all right, I'm done. Cool. That's what I'm trying to say. And I wonder how different.
Now that's what you need to express, because a lot of times what's happening is that person is defending themselves, but they're not looking at the systematic. They're not seeing the big picture. They're not seeing in their neighborhood that, hey, right around the corner, right around the block is a whole nother area, but it's a whole hood, and nothing ever clicked to you to be like, why, when I turn down this street, all of a sudden it's like ghetto, quote unquote, right? So sometimes I think people do start off with defending themselves, but sometimes the person on the other side is saying, I need you to see the systematic issue and the issue about the neighborhood that you live in and the issue with the people you hang around, or your leadership team being maybe one race, or look at the big picture. And I think that's the other side of it. When you are trying to pitch this idea that I don't see color, I don't see race, think about the aspect of, am I defending just myself? Do I need to listen to more of the bigger picture? And I think that's the other side of it too. We need to look at the bigger picture of it instead of you saying, I'm not a racist. But then again, on the other side of the person that's like on the fence, take time and let the person get it out, and then explain to them, this is the kind of action I need from you, or I would like from you. And also, this is what I want. This is the kind of perspective I'm trying to have you see.
Yeah, and I would just agree 1,000% with everybody just said, because what we're doing now is exactly how conversation should go. we're not overly cutting nobody off. Everybody, we getting everything out that we want to get out, and that's where positive communication happen, is hearing the other person. Now, I always tell everybody in conversation, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. You need to listen more and do a little bit less talking. And I believe if you build the conversation with listening first and understanding, man, look, we've been on this conversation for a whole hour, and we done got a lot accomplished just by listening to everybody and responding. And now I will leave this conversation understanding all of your point of views are a whole lot more just because I listened more than spoke more.
Yeah, so sorry if I seem a little disconnected, because we just had a brownout here in Idaho. And so the live went off, but I came back on and you guys are waxing deep, and I'm like, well, I just missed some cool stuff. Like, oh man. So hopefully we're back
So we're
live.
not live anymore?
No, I think we're live again. So
Okay.
I think you
Yeah,
guys
we're back
can
live.
go on.
Man, this was like there was like a meat and potatoes that
I know.
didn't
It's like I think that we were getting into the meat of it, and then the Facebook, at least my Facebook Live, dropped. So hopefully it's restarted. So I'm hoping we can recapture it. Hopefully we didn't lose any of you guys' awesome audio in the Zoom recording, but we shall find out. So
well, we just doubled down from the same question you was asking, like just like what can we do, and we were just still talking about the conversation. So yeah, we was in the same spot. But Aisha, I think it cut off on Sean, and Sean and Aisha, yeah, they were saying some heavy stuff. So I really hope we got that.
yeah. So is there anything that maybe we might want to reemphasize just in case? Because I think this conversation is so incredible and it's so needed. I mean, I've been getting messages, on my phone, and it's like, oh man, I mean, my messages are making me think of things too, while we're having this conversation. So I know it's important. I know it's weighing heavy on people's hearts. So is there something that maybe we need to recapture that we don't want to lose?
Can I say this with Mike? Mike, I would love to hear this from Mike and Aisha. She touched on this earlier. I think the thing that we haven't really touched on is the higher education. And I really think like retraining your mind and retraining your habits, that is going to help a lot. We cannot ask for change if we're going to stay the same. I just was wanting to hear from Mike, LeadershipFyre. So I want to hear from him, and I want to hear from Aisha on that one.
Yeah, and I think the it's an interesting thought. The concept of higher education. I don't know that's where I'm going to look at it. Your college degree, associates, bachelor's, doctorates. I don't think that's so much on the table, but it's your cultural degree that you give yourself. It's that diversity degree that you give yourself that will really make that difference. So we always have to be curious. And man, I hope anybody that's listening to this round table or that listens to any of our shows, I know they're book readers, and like I believe Aisha said earlier, reading books that are a little outside of your wheelhouse from people that don't look like you, people who don't think like you. But really, you'll learn the most, right? Just by being in spaces with people that are different than you, by being in like, if you ever go to New York City, downtown New York City, I mean, it is incredibly diverse. You are blessed if you get to live in a life like that, because then you'll see French, Italian, Indian, white, African American, you name it, everybody's together at one, and you're just living together. So instead of higher education, give yourself a better cultural education. And I'm not talking about going and eating Thai food. That doesn't count. You got to get in better spaces. You got to challenge yourself to be in community. Like we talked about, how do I ask those tough questions? You ask those tough questions for people that you're in community with. I can call Bobby, Aisha, Sean, Cornelius. I can call any of you guys and ask any question at all. I feel safe asking that question because you'll know my heart's in the right place. So if we want to get better, we need to challenge ourselves with what we're doing with our community and who we surround ourselves with. That's it.
It's interesting.
I love that. Get that cultural degree. Like, let's go.
I love that
because that was really good.
I love that and that insight, because I know when I was studying Spanish at the university, I was kind of really struggling with the language. And my brother, who is very fluent in French, he said, Jody, why don't you go read children's books in Spanish? And dude, I spent a year reading out loud every single day for 30 minutes a Spanish book. And it exploded my understanding and my insight and my ability to communicate in Spanish, because I got entrenched in the culture of a kid. I mean, think about that. If we could truly have childlike hearts and really talk to each other and love each other and see the beauty in each other, we wouldn't be having these conversations about George Floyd and other black men and women that have been abused and killed. And we need to start with change in our heart. So in final wrap up, because we've been going an hour now, let's go round table. And what is one thing that you think an individual can do to make a difference? And maybe it's just starting with yourself. Aisha, let's go with you and we'll go around the circle.
Yeah, so like I was sharing before, just to reiterate, going through that process and become self-aware of your, what I call the discrimination cycle. Do you have certain stereotypes that you need to unlearn? Is it from your family that taught you certain things, friends? Maybe you recognize that you don't really live in a diverse area. Maybe you start to realize like, oh my goodness, there might be some things, within my neighborhood that I never really paid attention to that I pay attention to now. So self-awareness is key. So unlearn those stereotypes and learn the right kind of information based off of the world we live in, which is very diverse. Next thing, check your unconscious bias. Again, those stereotypes are fueling your unconscious bias, and now it's affecting your behaviors. And now you might not realize that you are punishing African American maybe members within your organization differently than the others. Now you're saying it's us and them. Like, I don't want to live in this neighborhood with these kind of people. Where did you learn that behavior? So make sure you become self-aware. Once you become self-aware, now you can go to what Michael was talking about and get that cultural degree, because now you're going to say, I'm going to expand my thinking so I can grow beyond the small level of thinking that I had before and get entrenched in that culture, so I can now practice empathy and active listening.
Neil?
Yeah, I'm just doubling down with what she just said. Honestly, higher learning, and yes, I'm not speaking about going to college or, getting a degree. No, higher learning, educating yourself on whatever it is that you want to talk about, educating yourself on history, educating yourself on your neighborhood. I never try to make myself a part of anything if I don't read or do any research about it first. So that's basically it. Educate. That's basically it. That's what Aisha said, and educating yourself. That's all I have for you.
Okay, Sean?
Man, I agree with everybody, and I'll add my little nickel's worth in what I was just say. We live in an age right now where ignorance should not be an excuse. Resources everywhere at our fingertips, literally, our devices, our phones, our computers, whatever, and people. And once you check your own biases, once you work on self internally, then you can go outside and affect the change. But the change has to come from within first. So yeah, definitely agree with that.
My boy Bobby?
So with all these conversations going on, with all of these various opinions that people are having, it's uncomfortable. I've had conversations with people where even I'm like, I don't really want to talk about this right now. Sit in it. Be comfortable being that uncomfortable, because we've all done this where you say, oh, I want to get back in the gym. I want to get back in shape. Where do you say that from? The couch, while you're watching Netflix, right? You never have someone say that when they're hiking a mountain going, man, I really need to get back in the gym, and mean it. Get comfortable being that uncomfortable, because that is the place where your change is going to start.
Mr. LeadershipFyre, Michael.
So I'm going to circle back, but before I do that, I want to, we didn't touch on it a little. Aisha got there, but Empathy. You need to challenge yourself when you don't understand a situation or you don't understand where somebody's coming from, to see the world from their point of view. And that we spend too much time in our own bubble and not enough time trying to understand what everybody else is doing. Again, if you have that cultural degree, you can reach over and ask your brothers and sisters to help you understand. But a lot of people don't have that, right? When Jody was talking about being from Idaho, the white bread community, they don't have as much diversity. So they need, in those situations where you might not be able to build that culture degree, it's challenging yourself to have that empathy. When we see somebody fall down and get hurt, we now have empathy because we have fallen and gotten hurt. When you see something on the news or on TV, that may take a deeper level of challenge for you to try to step into those shoes, depending on where you're at, your growth, like Neil talks about. So I want to just throw that out there. And then I'm going to come right back to where I started. It's about peer pressure and standing up and being the man or woman you want the world to see you as. You know, we don't consider peer pressure as deeply as we should, but we all saw that video where the cops were walking down the street and the old man came up to him. They pushed him down. And the guy right next to the guy that pushed him tried to help the old man. And the guy that grabbed him and said, no, we're going to keep going. That's peer pressure. And that's about being able to stand up and say, no, buddy, I'm going to help this old man that just fell, right? And how many people behind those two cops? There's another 6 cops kept marching right past that old man, bleeding on the ground. You can see the blood from the minute he hits the ground. And it wasn't until we had a National Guard stop. He's like, I'm not going to help this guy, right? Because they have a different level of integrity and a different level of training that said that person needs help. I'm helping, right? So I'm just going to say, you've got to continue to stand up we have to stand it up in our own lives. Got all tongue tied because I got passionate there. We've got to stand up in our own lives, and your coworkers may try to stop you. They may tell that joke that's just a little off color. No, that ain't right, and I don't want to hear it. We've got to stand up with our family and our friends. We've got to change it, because if they think this is a safe room to tell that joke, it's not. If they think it's a safe room to do that thing, it's not. So stand up against peer pressure. I wish I had a more eloquent way to say that, and then empathy.
And Jody, I had one more thing. I'm sorry. One more thing.
No.
Keep the same energy with the Me Too movement. Keep the same energy when it comes to migration. Keep the same energy, because yes, right now we're talking about, and again, right now it's about this elephant in the room, which is probably, I know we talk about the example of, hey, if a neighborhood is on fire and we're talking about all lives matter, but that house is on fire, that needs immediate attention. That is the number one priority right now, to really work on this discrimination, this systematic issue we have. And as we transition and start working on better ways to really start make sure the system is broken down and built up, keep that same energy when something else comes around and you aren't as educated on it. Because again, I have seen scopes of some being a sexual abuse survivor, being someone, again, that's an immigrant, being someone that has had all these experiences. And I want to make sure we're having the same type of dialogue in these situations, because as a woman, I have never seen this type of conversation happen when you had the Me Too movement and sexual abuse and sexual violence on the front street. I haven't. So keep that same energy. But again, right now, the building that is on fire is the fire of racial discrimination, and that needs to be the top priority. All right, I'm done now.
No, I love it. I'm just so honored to be a part of, this community, to be part of the SpeakFyre family. I mean, if you look at the screen, this is what Martin Luther King envisioned. Men and women walking side by side, loving each other, respecting each other, hearing each other, trying to motivate change, and having that extend to our families and across our communities. And, I think about, I go back to, we have to be the change that we want to see in the world. And when we can become that change, then change is easier, especially when we're willing to be the voice for change. And I think about, I made a TikTok post earlier in the week, and I used the hashtag #OneRace, and somebody countered to me and said, hey, Jody, yeah, that's cool, but I love the diversity and I love the uniqueness. And it really made me think about a rainbow. A rainbow is comprised of 7 unique, beautiful colors with depth and character, but they don't stand alone. Unified and together, they make a rainbow, which is one of the most beautiful symbols in our world. A symbol that should be of unity and of love. And I just want to thank every single one of you guys for being a part of my life. And I would invite every single one of you that are listening, go check out the podcast. We got Aisha Thomas with InternalFyre. We got Neil Legend with ChampionFyre. We got Sean Brasfield with YoungFyre, Bobby Berg with StudentFyre, and Michael Gingras with LeadershipFyre, and I host FathersFyre. We really are here to ignite the fire within you to help you be the best people you can. So please comment, share this, join us on our podcast, and let's all create the change that we want to see in the world and be that change. So you guys have a fantastic Sunday, and we'll check you next time.
Yes, sir. Y'all take care.
All right.
Thank you. Have a good day, guys.
Bye, guys.